Coming up on UGTV, Standing Committee Meetings of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. A meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. This will be followed by a meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee.
All right, good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and get this meeting started. We'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. Public comment is welcome on any item that comes before the committee. Anyone wishing to speak on any item on the Standing Committee agenda may do so when that item is up for discussion. You'll have 5 minutes to make your comments from the podium in the middle of the room if you'd like to. We do ask that everyone speak as closely as possible into a microphone for accurate recording and broadcast purposes this evening. Commissioner Walters is unable to be here this evening, and so I'd like to thank Commissioner Bynum for standing in, and Commissioner Townsend, I understand, is on her way. But let's take roll call to start the meeting, please.
Roll call. Commissioner Bynum.
Here.
Regia.
Here.
Townsend. Burrows.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here. There are no revisions after the agenda was originally published, so our first item of business is to approve our committee minutes from December 3rd, 2018.
Move approval of minutes. Second.
There's been a motion and a second to approve those minutes as submitted. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Those minutes are approved as submitted. That takes us to our committee agenda. Item number 1 on the agenda tonight is an ordinance for amendments codifying weed and mowing violations. And for this presentation, I'll turn it over to Greg Talkin.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Daniel Kuhn. I'm with the Legal Department.
Evening.
I do have one quick amendment to the proposed ordinances. At the proposed ordinance of 8539, Section B, I'd ask that the committee consider the last word weeds to be replaced with the phrase excessive growth. That's a phrase that's defined previously in the statutes, or I'm sorry, in the codes. So I'd ask that that be considered as an amendment going forward.
I'm assuming everybody else just was right on top of that, but could you repeat that for me, because I was looking for the particular section. So it's, you said it's 8539B.
8539B. It is the last paragraph on a page. You might see 8547 penalty.
Right.
Right above that, there's the underlined paragraph that is paragraph B.
Yes.
The last word of weeds It says prior to removal of weeds, instead of weeds, that should be excessive growth.
Perfect, that's the one piece I missed, thank you.
So do we need a motion for that, Brian?
Is there, if you don't mind,
I'll say, is there a
Stand a little
presentation
off on
that goes
that.
along with this, just to kind of set it up?
yes. This is our effort to do two things, is to update the ordinance in line with state statute. In the past, there was an ordinance on the books that was rather old, so this is an update to meet the same intent that the state has on the books. But also, our major intent here is to be able to this year, anybody that's received a violation notice in the past on weeds basically in the last 12 months, we will be able to directly move to an abatement after we've sent them initial notice in the beginning of the year, the weed season. We'll probably send that out approximately in March before the weeds start growing, and that'll be the only notice they'd receive, and then we'll move straight to abatements when they exceed the allowable height of the weeds and or grass.
And so effectively, that's where this paragraph B comes in, just stating that there will be a notice for anyone who's been issued in the previous 12 months, and it will say that no further notice will be given. We'll move right to abatement. Is that correct?
Correct. We will also plan on, even though I'm not sure it's required by ordinance, we will also publish in the official newspaper of the Unified Government this same notice sometime in the range of March.
Okay. Commissioner Bynum?
I did notice in section A9, we are increasing the fines, is that right?
Oh, correct. You wouldn't mind speaking that, would you, Dan?
And so is there any other presentation other than that, or is it now just before the committee?
That's the only presentation we plan, but we'll answer any questions you have.
Okay. So does any other member of the committee have any questions or want more information on this? I mean, we have a red line strikeout copy, so all the changes are pretty well laid out in the document before us.
So move for approval with the suggested amendment.
There's a motion and a second to approve with the amendment to the last word of paragraph B, as you earlier said. Any further discussion, any comments? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Roll call, Bynum,
Aye.
Regia,
Aye.
Commissioner Townsend, we're voting on item number 1, if you'd like to vote on that. We're on item number 1, if you'd care to vote on this one, since you didn't hear the presentation.
No, that's fine. I'll get it. Aye.
Okay. Burrows,
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye. Those changes are approved as submitted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do have just one quick question. Is this revamping of the ordinance part of our SOAR initiative?
Commissioner, yes, that is the case. That's why you're seeing this before. We had some technical glitches with the way it was worded before in order to be able to execute on this particular item of giving people notice in advance of the start of the mowing season that we will move to abate. So, yep.
Great.
Cleanup that was needed.
Thanks.
Our next two items are from the land bank, and so I'll turn it over to Mr. Slaughter.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you. We'll get right into it. We have 3 applications tonight. We have one is a new construction, which will be a parking lot, and 2 property acquisitions. All applicants are current on their taxes and have no current code violations. The first is the land bank property. It's 1813 and 1817 Minnesota Avenue, and 805 is the building and is the applicant. They also own 831 on the block. And again, their plan is to have that be a paved parking lot for this establishment. And then we have 1522 and 1524. The applicant owns 1518 and 1520. This was approved back, I believe, in November, and this is no longer there. It has been demoed, so it's just a vacant lot, but the request is for these two to the west. The Land Bank Advisory Board did review these applications, and they recommended forwarding those to the board for final approval, and that's our ask tonight.
Any questions or comments from the committee regarding these? Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Slaughter, I was thinking about this as I reviewed them. Sometimes these names look so familiar, and I know this body had asked if a potential buyer had already acquired more than 5 properties, we wanted to delve more specifically into why they're asking for additional properties and what their intended purpose was. So not that I have any particular objection to these requests, but it reminded me, so, like I said, this name is familiar, if we could have on the application the number of properties that the potential buyer has already acquired from the land bank ever, not within just the last year, but ever. And that would kind of give us a heads up when we review this. And also a heads up to that requester to be here in case members had questions. So that was my comment and request. I had not talked to my fellow commissioners about it, but we had addressed this subject before, so I thought a good addition to the application would be to ask that question when the purchaser, the potential purchaser, makes a request.
Yeah, we can definitely start adding that information. I will add that anybody that's scheduled to be before this committee is sent a letter with the date and time, and their presence is requested. We do ask if they can't make it to contact us. And Ms. Pacheco, if that's who you're referencing, or the first applicant is in the audience. Did not say they were going to be here or not. But as far as the information goes going forward, yeah, if
Okay.
we can definitely dig that up. I will say that if names change because of marriage or stuff like that, that may make it difficult to give you an accurate count, but we'll definitely look into that.
Well, then the other question would be on that application, have you acquired property under another name other than the one that you're making a request under now?
Okay, yeah, we can definitely look in and change in the application to add that type of information request, and then hopefully they'll be forthright in their answers.
Oh, of course, they're residents of Wyandotte County. Thank you.
I just have 2 brief comments on these properties. First of all, Mr. Slaughter and I were talking a little bit ago about how for well over 10 years there was an abandoned building that sat on the Minnesota property. The demoing that building to create a vacant lot was an improvement for the block, but a parking lot to support a new business will be an even better improvement on that block. So I'm glad to see that progress going forward. And those 2 lots on Pacific are quite visible from Prescott Plaza, and so I'm glad that someone will be acquiring those and will hopefully keep track of those, and it will look better when you pull into Prescott Plaza as you look off to the northeast. Any other comments or questions on these properties? Would entertain a motion on these 3.
Move for approval?
There's a motion and a second to approve these applications as submitted. Any other comments? Roll call, please.
Roll call, Bynum,
Aye.
Regia,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
Burrows,
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye. Those are approved as submitted. Mr. Slaughter?
Okay, we have 3 donation requests. They're all from the same individual, Mr. Jenkins. It's 1640 South Valley Street and 1643 and 1645 South 13th Street. Just wanted to give you a little perspective of where these requests are located. So it's in the Argentine area, just a little bit south of the river there. This is kind of more close-up view. These are the 3 on South 13th, South Valley. Wanted to point out that the one right here to the south of these 2 is currently a Board of County Commissioner, so it's a property that we already control. So don't know what the future holds, but that does give us our larger footprint going forward if these are approved. So that's the ask tonight, is to approve those and forward to the board for final approval. Oh, and I'm sorry, I will state, the applicant does live out of town. He lives in Salina and has stated that he just does not have the means to keep the properties up. And that's generally why they're presented before you.
Chris, is this a wooded area that's on a steep slope?
I don't know about the topography, but according to the map, it does look like it is heavily wooded. So again, I'm not sure how soon something like this could be developed. But again, just wanted to point out, if all four, or all three, that would give us 4 right there. And whether we chose to just keep it as the same terrain, or possibly if someone was interested, we have a larger footprint to deal with.
So I kind of wish I knew what the terrain of the ground was. I'm pretty sure that this is a very wooded, densely wooded area on a very steep slope. I think that's what it is.
Just looked it up on Google Maps here, and this is the property, and I think you're absolutely right. These are properties that slope up from Ruby going south.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I just don't want to mislead the commissioners. I, for many years, have looked at this area of East Argentine for potential development opportunities. In my opinion, I think it's not developable. And from the engineers I've had out to do some ground and core testing, there are a number of underground springs in this area. And really, if we want to make sure those areas are somewhat maintained, it shouldn't require mowing or additional expense by the unified government, but it will require keeping the forest contained off the road and things like that, which we typically do with our easements anyway. I just don't want any of you misled to believe that this is an area that shows any sort of potential for development. So this is really just very typical of a wooded area that sits on a very steep slope that's undevelopable in Wyandotte County. So that's just my opinion, and from the little bit of work we've done over there.
Any other comments or questions regarding?
So I move for approval.
There's a motion and a second to approve these donations as submitted. Any other comments or questions?
So I do just have one quick question about people that donate ground, though. So do we have a policy, and I probably am just forgetting this, do we have a policy about flat developable ground that people just don't want anymore, and whether or not we're accepting those? I think we've talked about this several times. Are we just accepting any ground from anybody at any time? And are we doing that with people that are property tax delinquent?
You know, when we revised the policy last year, we set forth some criteria of what to bring to you and what not to. The reason these were brought today was just the fact this was an out of town, I want to say out of state, but out of town owner who had pretty much indicated that he just couldn't take care of it, or really wasn't. I will say Mr. Jenkins is current on all his taxes.
Oh, good. Okay.
But, you know, we don't get a lot of donation requests. I think the ones that, you know, meet a criteria that we could hopefully find a quicker use for, I think, yeah, we would definitely will champion those and bring those forward. But, you know, unless it doesn't meet the criteria in the policy, and they've, you know, still submitted the request, I mean, I think we'll still bring them to you unless we feel that we need to turn around and add criteria that would prevent certain, you know, properties to come before the committee. But
are you still a department of one?
I've gained some additional resources.
Do you have other employees in your department?
I'm with the Economic Development Department.
So they merged the two of you?
Yes.
Did you get more help out of that, or did they just merge you with a bigger department with?
No, I've gotten some help, yes.
Okay. We talked about at one time on these vacant pieces of ground that are developable that people want to get rid of, or that we currently have in land bank. Are we ever going to put up signage that says for sale?
I don't know about signage. We are waiting for an enhancement in our tax software that we'll be able to easily code which we feel are for sale, which we feel we need to hold, which we feel are not for sale. And that enhancement just hasn't been completed yet. Once we get that complete, we should have a map that will have the different properties color-coded. Key that and one of them will be for sale or for market, that type of stuff. We can for surely look at some sort of signage in there. And I think we talked last time about additional resources, so that could be something we could ask for an increase on to provide that type of documentation. But I think we're getting there. It's just still kind of slowly chugging along.
So the list and the way you're currently doing things is fantastic for larger, bigger corporations and developers, or even entry-level rehabbers. But what I'm discovering is that I'm getting calls from just people in the neighborhood that have a vacant lot next to their house that's been vacant for a long time. They don't even know that it's an option to buy it. So on those kinds of 25-foot front lots or 50-foot front lots, it really would be nice to have some signage, and I think they'd go actually rather quickly. I can only speak to my district, but I know that there are a number of people that are interested in vacant lots that sit next to their house for a yard expansion.
I think you'll find in the coming months we'll be bringing some strategies. They may be tailored more to a specific area, but we eventually will probably roll those out countywide, and I think we're heading in that direction.
Great.
We're still crunching data. And I think the goal is to say that whether it's block by block or by neighborhood or by area, here's the areas that we really want to focus on development. Here's the areas that we want to focus on the one-offs, where we want to try to maybe get someone that is interested in building a single-family home. Those are the ones we'll target for them. So we're close, but it's just taking some time. But that's the direction I think we're headed. Partnering with SOAR, I think they're going to be instrumental in helping come up with some of these strategies as well. And, you know, knock on wood, it may be next meeting we'll have some of those recommendations, but probably by the April meeting we'll be able to kind of at least give you the overview of where we're seeing taking the land bank from a marketing standpoint going forward.
Perfect. All right, thanks.
Mr. Burrows.
Thank you. And follow up with that question, do we go out and physically inspect the properties that people want to give back to us, so that we're not picking up a dumping area that has a tremendous amount of construction debris, or industrial dump site that somebody has illegally dumped and now all of a sudden it's...
We try to get out there. I know in the past it's been brought up about is a lot mowed. So I would say the answer is yes. Maybe sometimes not as quickly as we can get out there. I know we've had some weather issues the last couple weeks, but we're hopefully presenting you all the information that you guys need to make a strong decision on. So,
okay. Great, thank you.
On these particular donations, we have a motion and a second to approve as submitted. Roll call, please.
Roll call, Bynum.
Aye.
Regia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Kiernan.
Aye.
okay, and we just have our monthly rehab program update, and we're going to start with the number of houses we've received from the tax sale. Next month we'll be bringing a memo that'll have the properties that we just deeded over from the December sale. From a house standpoint, that sale will generated one house. We are expecting, I think, hopefully up to 4 more when we get the second deed from the sale, hopefully in another month. The number of contractors, as you can see, is continuing to grow steady. We are currently sitting at 103 and 104 if I would have entered one in, then I got at about 415. But we're still steadily getting the interest in it, and hopefully we'll continue to have that supply for them. So currently the number of houses we have in the rehab program is 93. And those categories, as we'll go here over in a minute, are everything that we have that is in the rehab program, the demos that we've recommended, and we do have occasionally a house that we have, maybe we're waiting on the court to decide whether they're going to give that property back to the original owner, or maybe currently we have an eviction that's going on. These are the house numbers that we have in the rehab program with no offers. That is starting to go down, and as we've increased the number of contractors, we have decreased the number with no offers. So we continue to, hopefully, we don't want to get to the point where we don't have any houses for our rehabbers to do, but that may be a good problem to have. This just outlines the increase in the number of houses that have had the demo completed, and we currently stand at 26 houses. And the previous slide, we have 24 properties that have no offers. So, but we're slowly taking care of the ones that need to be taken care of. And the ones we've recommended, as the one goes up, this one obviously will go down, and then we're sitting currently at 14 houses waiting for the demo to be completed. The number of rehabs started, we are sitting at 32. Some are just getting started, some are close to being completed, so we'll always see some fluctuation in that. Houses waiting to close. I think you've heard me comment before on just the reason there's so many is generally the request for title insurance. And we've had conversations with them, but it's just a lot of things that are out of their control. So everybody's been very patient, and hopefully we'll get that number down here shortly. The completed rehab still stands at 25. We didn't have any from the last time we met till today that have finished, but we do anticipate that going up. And of course, as I talked about, we have one property that we are going to send out the Sheriff's Department again for an eviction. This house has been kind of an issue that they threaten to go to the courts. We give them time to go to the courts. They don't go to the courts, or they don't. I think this last time they haven't paid their attorney, and I think he's walking away. So we're going to try the eviction process again. So that's the update. And if there's any questions, that's all I have tonight.
Commissioner Townsend.
Great job, Mr. Slaughter. I only have a question about the eviction situation. I thought, what is the circumstance that brings us to an eviction? Is this a house within the UG that we owned, or what's going on with it?
Yes, this one we've had for a couple months. So basically right now they're currently living in a house owned by the land bank. When we first approached them, they filed the proper filings in court to try to have the judge set the cell aside, basically. That proceeding stalled. That's when I was informed that they hadn't paid their attorney, really wasn't working on the case. That's when I instructed our legal department to go ahead and start the eviction process again.
So we acquired this through tax sale? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Appreciate your update. Thank you very much for your work. That is the last item of business on this committee's agenda. We will consider this meeting adjourned. Those of you who have land bank properties, all of those were approved as submitted, and you can follow up with Mr. Slaughter after the meeting to look at next steps. We'll give BPU Board Member Bryant just a minute to get up here to the table, and then we will convene Economic Development and Finance.
Well, we'll now call the meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee to order. We want to welcome everyone to this meeting. Public comment is welcome. Anyone wishing to speak on an item on the Standing Committee agenda may do so when the item is up for discussion. You will have up to 3 minutes to state your comments. Please come forward to the microphone and you will be recognized. For accurate recording purposes, we ask all present to speak directly into a microphone. I would ask at this point for roll call. Clerk, call the roll, please.
Roll call, Bryant.
Here.
We have Commissioner Bynum for Walters.
Here.
Murguia.
Here.
Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Burrows.
Here. Next, we have the minutes from our December 3rd meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
Move to approve as submitted.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Minutes are approved. We have 4 items on the agenda this evening. Item number 1 is for, my information is for information only. And we will have Kathleen Von Etchen, our Chief Financial Officer, is here to present this evening. So we're going to do the first of the number 1 item is fourth quarter of 2018 cash investment report.
Thank you. So I'm going to be introducing here Andrea Parra, who is going to be making the presentation. She's our Deputy Treasurer. So, go ahead.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. First slides here, just go over a few metrics. The average yield for this quarter is 2.2%. We have the days to maturity, which was about 360 days. And then our portfolio components, 40% were in cash and then 60% we had invested. The next slide, we're kind of going to go over the securities. Of our investments, we have 139 million or 50% that are in CDs. Total portfolio right now is this quarter was about 278 million. Then on the right side, you'll see we did have some maturities, or excuse me, some federal agency securities, 28 million or about 10%. Next slide is going to be kind of where we are in terms of compliance. I will note that Capital Federal during this quarter would have been within the limit of 30% or less. That was because we are holding what would have been about 65 million in property tax held for the entities. We will see a difference that will put them back out of compliance in quarter 1. They'll hit about 31% based on the calculation I did. With everything maturing by May, we should hit down below for a firm 30 or lower by the second quarter 2019. They have about 17 million that'll be maturing before quarter 2 of 2019, keeping them in compliance at that point. Then this will be what kind of happened overall in quarter 4. We did not make any purchases. Then we did have 4 matures, obviously all showing Capital Federal as well, which did help quite a bit lowering the amount that they were holding. As you see at the top, we did have quite the higher level of our operating account, which was part of what we were holding for the securities of the other entities for property tax. And this last slide I'm going to have Kathleen go over.
Thank you. So one thing I did want to point out is that since this is the year end, we earned $2 million more in interest than we did in the previous year. So, and that's because the interest rates rose during the year by the Fed, mainly. The other point is that purple area, or blue, is larger than the prior years, and that is mainly because we're holding quite a bit of cash because of the juvenile center. You know, there's a variety of temp notes that we're holding and spending down, and PBC bond money, and because we're in the middle of construction of various large projects. So that kind of goes into what I was going to talk about with this last pie chart, which is, you can see 47% of the total portfolio was in capital projects funds. The general fund has 20%, enterprise funds combined have 13%, and other special revenue funds have 10%. And that's all. on the investment report. Do you have any questions for Andrea or I?
This is just information only, correct? Okay.
Any questions? Anyone from the public have any questions? Seeing none, and as I stated, it's for information purposes only. Andrea will be making the presentation on item number 2. We're ready to move forward. Item number 2, it's on the pay it performance for the 2018 tax season. Andrea Parr, our Deputy Treasurer, is here to present.
All right, this is a kind of like a story we're going to tell, if you will. As you may know, we went live with Pay It in 2017, so we've had a full year and a full tax cycle to kind of compare what was done before as opposed to what we did here a few months ago. First one I'd like to touch on is we really hit the marketing really hard, thanks to the Pay It team and then the Knowledge Department and Alan's group. A few features we did, very top right side, you're going to see, I'm not really sure how to use this pointer. Okay, so this one here is going to be on the flap of every envelope we did, and then the back of your envelope you would have seen this marketing item. And additionally, we added what is essentially this large size. It's a business card shaped marketing card that every member of my office would have handed out regardless of what they were coming in to do, talking about what to do. We kind of pushed towards what we call an education campaign, where we wanted to push them to attempt to pay it first. My YCO app, then if there was an issue, we would bring them in for essentially mailing your payment in or walk-ins at the 3rd level. We did all 3 types of business, of course, but we tried to really upsell my YCO as much as we could this year. We did, like I said, we did heavy emphasis on the different envelopes that we had. Then we did heavy emphasis on the social media. We had Edwin Birch help us out, posted it to every newsletter, every market item. We went to neighborhood meetings, talked about the program. Then we also updated what we called their 6-foot tall standalone banners, if you haven't been in either of our office, that stand outside in the front lobby of both locations. This is going to be the results that we had on tax day on the 20th of December, kind of show you what we really did. On the 20th, we had 996 payments on the MyWICO app, totaling about $2.6 million of tax collected. Then we completed 92 walk-in payments for about $500,000. And then our back office team worked on mail and got about 304 mail payments, about 2.6 collected that day as well. Just to kind of compare, about 71% of the total payments that day were done online. And then we had 6% in walk-in and about 21% mail that we processed. This follows up from that slide, just shows you on the 20th, that red line is going to be the Pay It online payments that we received. Blue line is in person, and then you've got your green line, which is mail, and that's going to be tax day. As you kind of compare, every orange line is about higher than all the blue or green, which is great for us to see. New user data is going to kind of compare what we call a new user versus a guest. In 2017, when we went live, we only had captured about 1,800 people that actually joined the service, created an account, and have since synced their properties. After multiple different discussions with everybody we could talk to, we got 4,100 people to join as a new user. What that will essentially do is next year, 4,100 people don't have to call. They can go on, we push them a notification, and they pay their taxes in about 2 minutes. Or less. Next one is going to kind of just compare what we did last year to what we did this year. First half in 2017 got about 2,600 transactions. Tax half first in this year, 5,300 transactions. We're hoping to double, if not triple, the amount we get here in May as well, by just continuing to talk about the service, pushing it. Everyone in the office knows how it works from beginning to end, which really helps educate everyone involved. Yes.
With this increase in application for paying your property taxes, are we seeing a decrease in delinquent taxes?
Yeah, I recently took a look at that, and I'm very happy to report that where I was budgeting 7% on the city general fund side and 6.5% on the county, what we actually saw in 2019 was 5.5 for both.
Wow, that's good.
So a decrease of over 1%.
And what does that translate into dollars? Do we know, just a rough estimate?
No, I don't know offhand, but yeah, I will provide that during the budget process because we talk about delinquency rates then.
I'm just taking into consideration the $2 million in interest that we were able to achieve, and with additional property tax delinquencies dropping, that's important revenue for bonded indebtedness that we'll be discussing later.
Well, the $2 million is spread across all the UG funds, so some of it goes to sewer and a lot of the other funds, but sure.
I'll just add, I think there's a combination effect too. I think the work of the SOAR team to focus on delinquent tax and the work on the tax sale has also sort of driven additional messaging within the community about, so, you know, and this makes it easier for people to pay online, and so these things are sort of working in combination or in concert with each other in positive ways.
Right.
Is there a processing fee that the UG has to pay to use the service?
There is. So we have a per transaction fee that we pay to pay it, and then for if someone chooses to use the ACH option, which is your e-check option, it's free, and we pay a small amount on that. If it's credit card, people still have the option to use a credit card because that's a percentage of the transaction amount that is passed through to the end user, to the person paying the taxes. So we retained the free option to pay, but whereas in the past we just had the credit card option, we had very high credit card fees as a result. Large taxpayers were paying using credit cards and thousands of dollars worth of associated fees with that for a single transaction. So we've basically sort of flipped that ratio, if you will.
But so the credit card fees, which very aware of because we see that at pay online at BPU, but the credit card fees are the responsibility of the payee, payer, and the fee, just the general online fee to use, is a set fee per transaction, not based on the amount.
That's correct. Okay. And that is absorbed by the UG.
Yeah.
There's no cost to, that per transaction cost is not factored in. It doesn't show up on your bill, in essence.
No, it's just a convenience to try to improve.
Correct. Because, it's certainly a lot, cheaper to process an online payment than any other form of payment. Somebody walking in the door, somebody paying by mail, the cheapest channel for them to pay is paying online.
Well, it's nice to see that it has increased the traffic, so thank you.
And Andrea, if you went back to that daily, that showed every transaction that in the past, you speak to this, it would have looked different where what is now the orange, where the online payments would have been the mail-in payments. So again, that sort of whole channel, those channels have flipped in essence.
Actually leads up to the next slide we are going to go over. As you see, for the month of December, each month it kind of breaks out what credit card fee the unified government has saved by using this new process through Pay It. As Alan was kind of touching on, the UG used to pay the credit card fees. Now they're passed through to the payee, who then is assessed the fee based on what they're charging. And then most honestly, 70% of our residents are using that free feature through ACH. And this kind of just breaks down the revenue over time. We've got December 2018 hits at about 12 million over time based on the comparison of December in 2017. I would say we doubled that for sure. That's all I had. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Any questions? Commissioner Kieran? Just a couple. So, Mr. Howes knows I've been an early adopter of this, and there were some growing pains that, with credit to your department, you have worked through each of those growing pains. I just want to know how responsive has the vendor been to concerns that have come up, requests for feature changes, requests for bug fixes, those types of things?
I'll start, and Andrea. So we've been having a weekly meeting with the vendor. We started back, this conversation started in July for how we were going to advertise and support the marketing for the fall tax season. They have been with us every step of the way, providing ideas and providing feedback on ideas that our team presented. So I think they've been quite responsive. There's more features that we've identified that we would like to continue to iterate and improve upon, and Andrea can speak to those as well.
Yeah, not only have they been very open, I mean, every meeting we have, it leads with, here's what we're doing next, here's the ideas we have, even to the point where there's weeks where we don't even realize there was a bug because it was already fixed when it was brought to us, whether it be an interest issue or something did not download right. Most of the time we know because it's already fixed. From my experience being in Treasury, I've never used another vendor that is so cooperative, but also informative and very transparent when there comes an issue and they accept the fault, fix it, and move on. Our residents do not suffer when they use this product, for sure. We're open, we have a dashboard, a long list of things we want to do. We're working with multiple different departments, seeing how we can push anyone who does anything in terms of making a payment goes through my WICO. Setting up reoccurring payments is the next goal. We'll meet with them next week to make sure that's on the board. They're just really sky's the limit of what they can do for us.
And this is something I had communicated with Mr. Howes about. I had one complaint that you couldn't link multiple properties together, and I just want to confirm that you can make one payment for multiple properties with one transaction. Is that
correct? Yes, that is correct.
And so the person who complained to me said that they had been informed by your office that that was not possible. So all of our staff do know the capabilities of the system, and they're able to give accurate instruction and feedback to anyone who calls in?
Yes, we actually had a vendor representative come out and do a walkthrough from beginning to end at our October offsite training, and then we reiterated every time we have meetings, we discuss how to use this function and to sell it, upsell it, and make sure you understand how to work it.
Perfect. I really do appreciate it. I'd love to get a report someday on the code violation module, since that was the one that I downloaded even during your presentation, that it was available, and have used it and have been pleased to see many similar evolutionary changes in it, but I'd love to get an update on where it is at some point down the road.
Yeah, we'd like to bring that to you this spring, and I think the 4,000 new people that have set up accounts now, part of the benefit of that is that they're also able to use the 311 feature on that as well to submit whether it's code violations or potholes or any number of things. So you want to continue to think about how we can use that user base to improve neighborhoods, to improve the community. The other benefit is that you can also pay your motor vehicle registration through that. So
I do that too, by the way.
So that's an additional benefit for Treasury is that you can, as people begin to link their vehicles to it as well, that again becomes less calls and service requests that are coming in Treasury, and more that people can do 24/7 at their convenience and at no cost.
Well, I really do appreciate it because, as I said, I experienced a rocky start in my association with this app, but it has grown in ease of use, and certainly I'm a strong proponent. I pay all my stuff through it. So thank you.
Any other commissioners? Seeing none, Ms. Parr, thank you for your presentation. This was for information only again, so we appreciate the information.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to item 3, which is a discussion and a resolution adopting our debt policy revisions. Again, Kathleen Von Atchen, our financial officer, is here to present this evening. And so, Ms. Von Atchen, if you will make your presentation, please.
Thank you. The presentation tonight is just to review or talk a little bit about some, the debt policy revisions, but, and to provide some graphic information of how the debt structure would look given certain ratio guidelines that are discussed in the policy. But I would recommend that we hold on voting on this policy until the March meeting when we can have all of it finalized at that time. I've had a variety of meetings with various commission members over this past month, and so I think it would be best if we held off. But at this time, I did want to present to you some information I've compiled. So tonight, no action, in other words.
Okay, so this will be for information purposes only.
That's correct.
Okay.
So as you know, we've been reviewing all of the policies and the meeting tonight is really just to answer questions and have discussion, and I hope that we can adopt it in a future date. So we want to prepare policies that have a high-level principle that direct the strategic vision of the organization, that mitigate costs or risks that are critical in public policy discipline, and then also these policies are recommended by ICMA and the GFOA. So last month, we went over the policy that as revised, and so here are the major sections or categories of the policy as discussed before. The purpose of a debt policy, the purposes for borrowing, the criteria for determining whether it's feasible or what's the impact of a debt financing of a project, the asset life, the credit rating, the types of financial instruments. There's a variety of them. There's a section on debt ratio guidelines, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. In addition, later on, there's in the policy, there's also various debt and financing parameters, and then how a bond is approved, and then the glossary of terms. So in the debt ratio guidelines, there's some discussion of what kind of ratios do we look at for only general obligation debt that is funding governmental activities projects. There's also another section on what debt ratios do we look at when we're issuing revenue bonds for electric utilities or for the water utility or for the sewer utility. And so tonight I only want to talk about that debt that's general obligation bonded debt that is supporting governmental activities that are not business type activities. So in other words, what I'm referring to is what's often referred to as the $15 million a year debt, the general obligation debt that pays for our streets and for many of our other capital projects that relate to our infrastructure and pay for facility replacement and that sort of thing.
These aren't economic development projects.
That's right, because the economic development projects are often paid for from special revenue bonds where sales tax revenue or property tax revenue is generated within the project to pay that debt. So that's separate from what we got here tonight that I'm talking about. So the guidelines or the ratio guidelines I've outlined in the revised policy are two. They're very common in most cities. It's debt per capita and then debt as a percentage of the county or the city's assessed valuation. Okay, and so the first one is very easily calculated. It's that general outstanding governmental general obligation debt that's found in our CAFR under the long-term financial, long-term liability table. And then you just divide it by the total KCK population. So one revision that I'm recommending, which isn't in the packet tonight, is that when we do this calculation, that we use Kansas City, Kansas population and Kansas City, Kansas assessed valuation. So, you know, because our organization is so large, you know, and Kansas City, Kansas does make up 93% of the total population in Wyandotte County. So a lot of times we sort of interchangeably use the city of Kansas City or interchangeably use Wyandotte County when we really should be real specific and just talk about the city of Kansas City, Kansas. So this bonded debt that's paying for general governmental infrastructure improvements is all coming from a city mill rate. And so when we do our ratios, we should also use the city population and the city assessed valuation, because that's the right way to go. So that was sort of what I'm making a few refinements to the policy that you have in front of you, or that was posted on the agenda system tonight to accommodate some of those nuances. And there's also some edits which some of the committee members suggested. So I'm taking that total bonded debt and divided by the city population. On the county, or on the assessed value side, and I probably should have, I should have written city here, guys. So I should take the debt as a percentage of the city's assessed valuation, and that's the calculations I did do, so I'm gonna show you here in a second. All right, and so that one's presented as a percentage, so you multiply it by 100. All right, so now, how does that look? So what we're gonna show you is a series of 3 graphs. One of it is just the outstanding debt, right? How much debt in this category is there, and how does it look out in the future, right? The second graph will be the debt per capita, and then the third graph is the debt as a percentage of assessed value. Now, so this is if we did not issue any more bonds. We just issued bonds last Monday, or last Thursday. So this is how we look, all right? And so today, our outstanding general governmental debt level is $300 million. So basically, we're about right there. Okay. And if we were to, and actually it's no more bonds after 2019, but it does bump up a little bit because we have included bonds as they were approved in the current CMIP, all right? So I have to qualify that just a little bit. So we have the current CMIP financed here, and then after that, there are no more bonds. So it drops all the way down to $57 million in 2039, okay? Now, this is how it looks for GO per capita. So right now, in 2019, it's $1,900 per resident. And as we pay down those bonds, it drops down to $300 per resident. So just like just consider it like your mortgage, like that, where it drops as you pay down the principal.
Kathleen, may I stop you just 1 second?
Yes.
The question that I would have, you show no additional bonding after 2027, but realistically, we know we have 17 million, I believe, in the budget that we bond every year.
Yeah, so
that we look at bonding every year for projects. So that's not reflected in this graph.
That's right. What's reflected here is only financing the amount that is in the current capital maintenance and improvement plan. So next year there's about 19 million. The year after that, I don't remember offhand how much, but and we can look it up. But whatever is already approved for projects is in this graph. And then after that, no more projects. Right. So, and I'm showing you these 3 graphs as a baseline so you can make a judgment compared with the next graphs I'm going to show you.
Okay.
And I know, sorry.
Go ahead.
And I know that we've talked about this multiple times and at strategic planning and stuff, but I have to hear you say it. Is that really possible?
Well, you know, our community is aging, and so we have dire infrastructure needs as our streets become, you know, there's a lot of condition maintenance that needs to happen, and there's a lot of replacement and rehabilitation of our streets. So this is not doable. But the recommendation in the debt policy is it's not necessarily to adopt any specific ratio target, but to provide a guideline. And so we're going to go through that in a moment. What is an investment in our infrastructure that's sustainable and yet still maintain and yet still diminish our outstanding debt?
And again, these are capital improvement projects and regular expenses that normal government incurs on a regular basis. Road improvements, sewer improvements.
Well, not sewer. Sewer's enterprise fund.
Three things that are so people know what you're talking about.
So buildings and facilities
that are owned by the government.
Roads, bridges, sidewalks.
That's good.
Yep. Okay. So right now it's at $1,900 per resident, and then on a debt as a percentage of assessed valuation, and remember this is the city. Right now we are at 25.7% of that's how much outstanding governmental GO debt as a percentage of our assessed value. It's at 25.7%. Moody's and S&P, the credit rating agencies generally think 15% is a better percentage, but don't lose hope because you're gonna see some information here in a minute.
But if I may, at a time of low interest rates, the exception to carrying a little more debt than usual is the fact that debt is cheaper now than what it would be in a higher interest environment. Even though carrying debt is not what a business should do, but with the market as being as it is with the low interest rates on borrowing money, it's cheaper to do it now than it would be in hypothetically 2 to 4 years from now.
Well, and that's a very good point. I am going to back up to the 2 slides before and touch on that topic for a moment. So you can see in 2009, we had an $85 million increase in our outstanding debt, and that was because the unified government and the commission approved bonds that were backed by they called the stimulus bonds, and partly as a result of undertaking those stimulus bonds, we got credit back from the federal government on the amount of interest that was due on those bonds, and so they turned out to be very inexpensive. So that is part of the reason why all of this is still sitting out here. It increased dramatically. As that burns off, then you see the slope coming down. So.
And that's the recession time that we're referring to on the stimulus programs.
Yeah. So now we're here. Now you notice there's this big kind of peak right here. Now, the reason that this drops down is because our assessed value went up. So as our assessed value went up, the percentage of debt as a percentage of assessed value went down. So that's the benefit of growth in our assessed value. That's why the credit rating agencies look at it so closely. We can grow our debt as long as the growth of our city and our county is growing as well. It's when you enter into debt and you're not seeing a lot of market value improvements in your area that, it's problematic.
Do those projections out to 2039 take into account the potential for growth in our property values, or is that solely based on not taking out additional debt?
This 2.9% is a 10-year average of the assessed value of the entire, So it factors in the recession as well as the recovery.
Okay.
Yeah, that's purely all it is.
Doesn't have the ongoing add-ons to it.
Right, I get that. I just wanted to make sure in the projections that you've included the average rate of appraisals going up.
Right, so very conservative, right? Because last year we had 7.5% for the county, so. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the currently at the administrative policy, or the direction that the county administrator has taken with your guidance, is that we issue about $15 million a year on average in governmental general obligation debt, right? And, well, this past budget year, you all approved, he recommended and you approved $13.5 million. But then subsequent to that, we added another $2 million for the grade school, which I'm forgetting the name of it now. Bruni, thank you. So we brought back up to 15.5 million, just so you know. So this is how so you notice how it's not going down here. So before this was all going down here, all the way down to $59 million. Now we start around 300 million and we end at $277 million. So not growing the level. So by doing this, pursuing this guideline or policy, we're not actually growing our outstanding debt, because we're adding as we pay down, we add, and so it's staying pretty much level with where it is. It does represent an investment in our community and addresses those infrastructure needs, right? So, but this is how the ratios look. So our debt per capita, right now it's at 1,900. At the end of this period, it drops down to 1,500 or 1,600. So it does drop down a little bit. And on a assessed value basis, it drops from that 25.7% down to 18%. And, you know, the credit rating agencies, they kind of like to see 15%,
But do we have any information on how less of an investment, okay, so let me see if I have this right. We're gonna spend less general obligation money on these types of improvements. So I assume that means we're gonna do less projects.
Well, this is actually what we're doing now. We actually are just spending about 15 million a year in new money. So if we were to do less projects, that would be the next 3 slides. So go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so this is if we do the same.
Yeah.
Amount of money that we're doing now.
Status quo. Status quo. Yeah.
It's going down, and then you're gonna show us if we do less.
Yes.
So we are gonna issue general obligation bonds. We're just gonna issue less than what we have in the past.
Well, that's entirely up to you, because the policy actually just provides some guidelines, and you all provide us what direction or strategic direction you want to undertake. So the policy just helps you to frame your thoughts around your outstanding debt, so you can say, yeah, you know, I think we want to target this amount per capita or this percentage as a percentage of assessed value, and then from there we're able to move forward with how much new debt we should issue, or in order to meet those guidelines.
Right, and just for clarity for people watching, because I get this question in my district, these kinds of projects don't generate any revenue. So there's a difference in the general obligation bonds the government issues to pay for government expenses than the general obligation bonds that are issued for example, economic development deals, which typically the way those deals are structured is that the deal itself is paying down the debt on those general obligation bonds, not the taxpayer, correct?
That's correct, yeah. That's not part of this at all.
Right, so there's no potential to get revenue from any of these projects. These are just things we have to do.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I would add, it's not a monetary return, but what you will see is a goodwill. You'll see a public that sees new sidewalks, new streets. You'll see enhancement in their neighborhood. You'll see a commitment to people to stay in their neighborhoods and continue to grow our population. That's the return on a GO investment if it's done properly.
That's right. So there are intangible benefits to the community, which we're calling quality of life, that if we make these improvements, then generally the community will feel more happier in their community and more fulfilled in their, you know, as they travel to work or play in the parks, what have you. And so that all intrinsically has a benefit, which may translate to improved assessed value on the growth of their property, because as they enjoy where they live, others will see that and want to move here too, and it may drive demand up. But it's not necessarily a revenue that's pledged like an economic development bond.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree with what Commissioner Burrows and you are saying, that I get that putting in a new street or a new sidewalk greatly enhances the quality of life, but also does have an effect on the appraised value of individual residents that live on that street, which I think is good. I only emphasize that because if we decide as a commission to issue less general obligation bonds to provide those kinds of infrastructure needs to our community, it will have an effect on our appraised values.
It certainly could, yeah.
I would like
de-investing or investing less in our community.
Well, I think we've seen that in particular in the older parts of our county and those older neighborhoods east of 635, with the lack of investment in sort of those basic infrastructure needs, what happens to appraised values, and also what happens to the housing stock. There isn't a lot of motivation for the resident to reinvest if their own government isn't reinvesting. So I'm anxious to see how we're going to issue less general obligation bonds and maintain the quality. I'd like to see it actually go up, the quality of our infrastructure. It'll be interesting to see how we're going to do that, maintain valuations, and keep our residents motivated in maintaining their property.
All right, so now if we dropped it from 15 a year to 12, how does that look? Well, we're starting out at around $300 million. With 15, we end in 2039. We end with $277 million. But with 12 million a year, it's 233 million. So instead of 277, it's 233, right? Yeah, a $12 million investment. So $40 million less at the end of, roughly 20 years, right? Now, on a per capita basis, so right now we're at $1,900 per resident. And at the end of the 2039, we would be at $1,300 per resident. If we stayed at the 15 million per year, it'd be $1,500 per resident. So $200 less if we changed from the status quo. But it still drops, because we were at 19 and it goes down to 13. And then if we were to invest 12 million, how does it look in terms of the debt as a percentage of assessed value? So right now we're at 25.7%, and it drops to 15%, which is basically what Moody's, in fact, Moody's and S&P would recommend. But at the current status quo value of 15%, it's around 18%. So just if we may continue to just invest or issue debt of 15 million a year, we end up with 18% at the end instead of the 15% if we dropped it to 12 million a year. Clear as mud.
Questions, Brian?
Well, I saw the next slide said questions. So, I didn't know if you were done with this slide.
I am. That's it. That's all I wanted to present tonight. It was something for you to take a look at and visually see and consider.
I just wanted to put this out there. Historically, I've been concerned about the amount of debt that we're issuing, and I want us to be prudent in that. But I will say, going back to Commissioner Murguia's comment about infrastructure improvements, I am struck more and more and more by the critical need to improve the infrastructure in our older neighborhoods, the streets, the curbs, the sidewalks, and the alleys. And it is going to take a very large investment on our part. And so while I want us to be cautious about significantly increasing the amount of debt we take on for infrastructure purposes, I also don't want to see us cut it down any, because we are in such a large hole, and we're going to take, it's going to take a lot of resources and a lot of time to dig out of it for the benefit of our residents.
I also have another, I guess, comment and question. So I've been gone for a little bit, but when I came back, I understand there's been some changes in regard to, it's a little bit different, but it does relate to this, that our government has decided to not issue general obligation bonds on development deals any longer. Or they're going to be more strict about the projects that they do invest general obligation bonds in. So if I'm saying this, but if I'm wrong, someone correct me, because I really am not completely sure, but I think I understand this. So when we issue, in the past, since I've been up here, when we've issued general obligation bonds on development projects, we usually require that developer to install new roads, new curbs, new sidewalk as part of that development deal. And my understanding is the development itself has to pay those general obligation bonds off, not the residents through our traditional tax base, like what we're referring to tonight.
Well,
okay, go ahead, take that.
Well, so ideally what we want to do is issue, special obligation bonds that are economic development bonds, right? That are not backed by the general obligation of the government. So when you refer to general obligation bonds, they do get lumped into here because basically we've determined that the project isn't secure enough to generate the revenues to make the debt service payments. And so we have to issue an annual appropriation clause. And so if the project doesn't generate enough revenue, the unified government is on the hook to make the debt service payments. So there's two types of economic development projects, and you just need to keep that in mind when we're talking about it. Is those projects that don't have a history of a revenue that is strong enough to be able to sell the bonds to investors because the investors are concerned about whether they're going to get their return as they expect. So those bonds, we have to tack on a GO backing or an appropriation clause. And so our direction is that because our economic development efforts are becoming more mature than they were, say, 20 years ago, we feel now that perhaps we're in a position where we can be a little bit more selective about which projects we want to assume risk for and which others we don't. That's probably more, but I don't actually remember anything happening per se in the last month or so, but generally that's the direction the administration would like to take.
Well, you would think, okay, so I think most people would agree that growth is risky in development, but without taking that risk, there's no potential. So you take the risk or there's no potential at all. So I think there does need to be some risk. But I guess what I don't understand is, would we rather just pay for infrastructure improvements ourselves and rely on our taxpayers to shoulder that entire burden? Or would we rather take a little bit of risk that a potential development deal or potential economic development situation could incur that debt? I just think logic would rule on the side of if there is even remote potential for someone else to pay that debt other than our residents, why would we not take that level of risk?
So right now in this section of the debt policy, we don't talk at all about projects that developers potentially would be interested in maybe doing if we gave them support. These are projects that don't have any possible means of generating any other revenue. And so that's what we're talking about right now.
Well, maybe, and I'll just throw out, and I won't belabor it, and I can meet with you later about more of the specifics, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe if we looked at our infrastructure around the county as opportunities for development potential, instead of just a burden to shoulder to, improve them, and we incentivize those areas with general obligation bonds for potential development, we can get the infrastructure that we need and the improvements that we need, not to mention create additional jobs, and at the same time, potentially share the risk of the payoff with another party other than our taxpayers. So they are very separate. I agree, Kathleen. I'm not sure that they should be. Because if we're having to revamp these infrastructure areas, then there has got to be some sort of development potential there, because that would mean nothing else is there.
Well, rehab or replacement of old streets, that's what we're talking about here, and other similar activities, facilities that are very old and rehabbed.
So I would like to see those top projects, like let's just say the top 10 projects that we'd like to do in the next couple of years, where they're located at and what we plan to do. The ones we want to spend the bulk of our bonds on. I would like to see those.
I'll send you a link to our budget document with what page to look at specifically. I wanted to have that up here on the screen to show you.
Yeah, because I don't think those are neighborhood streets that are eating up the bulk of our money.
And what we do is we review all those as part of in May, as part of the capital maintenance and improvement program budget process.
Okay, well, I would, yeah, and I know I've seen those projects before, and a lot of times there are large stretches of road that maybe aren't necessarily neighborhood roads, but I would just like to see the top 10, even the top 5.
Okay.
Projects that we're spending money on.
Brian, Mr. Bryant.
Kathleen, I appreciate the scenarios, and my one hazard would be that you're projecting out 20 years, and I don't believe that $12 million will buy you $12 million worth of what you're seeing now in 10 years.
Yeah, well, we had to make it a little.
Yeah, I understand. I just believe that even the 15 million won't be 15 million anymore.
Right.
It's.
So you do see the dramatic. I'm going to take you to the 15 million. Oh wait, yeah, this one. You do see the dramatic impact that an increase in our assessed value has. It really does improve the capacity of your debt. You know.
Well, and I believe that's going to be the biggest gain, will be the fact that, you know, in 20 years from now, 15 million will cost us 22 million.
Yeah.
To realize the same value, but hopefully our growth in assessed value is more than 2.9.
Well, if I'd inflated the 15 million a year, then I think everyone would have been really confused. But
yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bynum.
Thank you. I don't disagree with what you're saying at all.
Yeah.
But I need to make sure I'm understanding, since I don't normally sit on this committee either, that these slides are talking only about GO debt, nothing else. And
what's really a little bit confusing, by the way, is when we say GO, you know, we do issue general obligation debt for sewer. I am not including that in here because sewer pays for itself through sewer rate fees.
Okay. And then when we keep moving down through the packet, the next item is revenue bonds, which are used, can be used for economic development.
Yes, there are some economic development related
revenue. That's not this.
No, no.
And so what you're suggesting is, and I guess part of this is a question because it talks about how each of these are set out by state statute, the ways that we can use the various forms of debt. And so I think you're suggesting we be a little bit more outside the box.
Yes.
With how we might use PO debt versus maybe another of these forms of debt. And then my question just becomes, is that yet another arena in which we are constricted by what the state law tells us we can and can't do?
No, because we do that now. We have issued general obligations on large economic development projects. So just a mini example, because I happen to be intimately familiar with it. When the Walmart was built on the Superfund site in Argentine, it was a requirement of that development to put in substantial curb and sidewalk, and road improvements were made to Metropolitan and 24th Street. So I'm just saying, when we look at an area that's in need of these traditional, regular maintenance kind of things, is there someone out there that is looking strategically at those? And maybe what we do is we look at our economic development incentive packages and our financing options there, because at least we then have a partner in the debt. We're not trying to pay it ourselves. So it's, right. I mean, it's a bad analogy, Melissa, but it's sort of like, do you want to just go out and buy a new car for yourself, or would you like someone to potentially help you pay it off? And economic development is sort of like that.
I was just wanting to make sure I understood, you know, are there constraints that keep us from doing more of that kind of?
Right, and I do think there's a lot of public confusion when you talk about, and I know you all hear it.
Different kinds of debt, right?
Absolutely, and I know that all of you get the same calls I get from people complaining about why we're giving these wealthy developers a bunch of money, they're making tons of money, and we're not getting anything out of it. What they don't realize a lot of times is we are getting something out of that. They just, I don't know if it's the way we're explaining it or it's too technical for the average person to understand, because I know that I didn't when I first came up here. I'm just saying there is some very strategic, creative ways to look at, look at making not just infrastructure improvements, but developing our county, because I'll just leave with this very broad brush statement. All of our staff do a good job watching our money, and everybody does the best they can with what we give them as part of our budget, how much money we allow them. I personally have not seen a lot of waste of financial resources on behalf of our staff. But when they run out of asphalt patch and they don't have any more money to buy more, then we can't fill a pothole. So I'm just saying that instead of us trying to shoulder that entire burden, we need someone that has the ability to look at these areas that need improvements strategically from an economic development standpoint, figure out a way to partner with developers in making those improvements, and also creating development opportunities that create jobs and amenities for the people that live here. And until we grow our county, you can only stretch $1 so far. At some point, it's just not $1 anymore, it's $1.50. And I think our staff's done a really good job at that. So I think from a policy perspective, we're gonna have to come up with a more strategic way, and we're also gonna have to do a better job at explaining this and educating our constituents and the taxpayer about actually how these kinds of debts are paid off. Because right now they're under the impression they're paying for things like that.
No, that makes sense, and it kind of leads to one of the other questions that I had thought of as I was trying to read through the packet, which is just, once this committee does approve a debt policy that comes forward to the full commission, is that going to be in a place that's very easy to get to on the website, where people can go and see it and understand it for themselves?
Yeah.
So just have to throw.
Policy will be on our finance department fiscal accountabilities rule website. And by the way, this debt policy, it has a lot more verbiage and discussion of how the debt process works and how we evaluate projects and how we finance them. But it doesn't actually specifically set what kind of level you all want in terms of debt. It just provides some guidelines, okay? So
it's a very small, sorry, Tom, but it's a very small, in the weeds, incremental story, I'll tell you. But for example, I think we just had Land Bank tonight, where people are actually, the Land Bank and SOAR are doing a phenomenal job marketing those vacant lots in older parts of our community where we all know the infrastructure is poor, for example, the curb and sidewalk. It would seem to me, if that person is interested in acquiring a piece of ground, a vacant piece of ground, next to their home to make improvements or do a yard expansion, and they have money to invest. I think a missed opportunity is why are we not at that time promoting, we have a 60-40 curb and sidewalk program where if you just invest a little bit more money, you can put new curb and sidewalk in front of your house, and the government will pay 60% of that, and you only have to come up with 40% of that. And then all of a sudden, we're seeing these incremental improvements all across our older areas. It's just those little tiny incremental ways are way beneath what our staff is doing tonight. They're looking at a much bigger, more global picture, but in my mind, we need to get someone that is really focused on a very grassroots level incremental improvement strategy.
Any other comments? I might state that I want to go back to my original conversation in reference to the low interest rates that are being paid right now on bonds. Some of us have witnessed is borrowing a large sum of money at a lower rate to attack a major problem that encourages external investment is worth the risk when the bond market is low. And we can attack those big item issues so that we don't have those big item issues come forward when we have a higher interest rate and struggle to make everyday investments for our local unit of government. I believe the general public understands that government is a business. We have to provide services, and it's our responsibility to do them in an efficient, effective, and fiscally cost-sound manner. And we can do that if we are willing to take some of that financial risk that you're talking about. And Commissioner McGee, when you were talking, Star Bonds for Kansas on the state level is doing just that. It brings the private sector, the public sector, and the government sector together. Right. and builds large developments. And I just don't know if local governments are there yet being able to do just that. But I think if it comes to project specific, I believe the new debt policy that I've been reviewing has those criteria in there to measure the return on investment within the project of distribution of funds. We have an opportunity here to look at these graphs, and I could make recommendations of other things to add to these graphs, but these are pretty simple for the complicated discussion that we're having in reference to those. But Mr. Bryant brought out, this is a 20-year projection. That is, if we take on no additional debt and we go from a 15 million to a 12 million, and with the interest rates being the way they are, the 15 million might be the place to stay right now. I don't like borrowing money. Right. But in 3 years, if the interest rates jump up to the extent that they could, 12 million may be the cap that we want to look at. We discipline ourselves. Right. And those are the things that we will look at as a body to make those financial decisions to help lower our debt. And one thing this graph doesn't review is that we haven't started paying off debt earlier with our new debt policy pay down that we talked about as a commission, which will have an effect on that bell curve. Thank you.
I completely agree with Commissioner Burrows, completely. I think you're spot on. But we got to start somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it starts with this committee, and there's enough people in this community that will provide us the guidance necessary to make the right, rational, fiscally responsible decisions. So anything else, Kathleen? You want to move on with your next slide? That's it?
That's the whole presentation.
Anybody from the public care to make a comment? Let it be known that nobody stepped up. This was for information purposes, and you want us to review the policies that were presented in our packets and be ready to discuss the possible passage of those at the March meeting.
Right. So in a few weeks, you're going to get a packet for the March meeting, and it's actually going to have a brand new it'll have what you have with a few more tweaks, and then but all kind of spelled out and real clearly, and then a resolution for you to approve.
I would encourage the committee, as we did with the investment policies, to review those, and should you have questions, to reach out to Kathleen early, or write them down in a document and send them out to other members to see if they have the same questions, and we can expedite the questions that may come about from the new policy recommendations. Take it a bite at a time versus trying to do it all in one evening, if we can chip away at it during the next month. So thank you, Kathleen. I look forward to the opportunity to review those policies. All right, item number 4. If there's no other discussion, our last item is a resolution setting a public hearing date for the Downtown Grocery Redevelopment District, Project Area 1. This item was held over from our January 14th meeting. Catherine Carter, our Interim Economic Development Director, is here this evening to make the presentation. Ms. Carter, where's yours?
Commissioner. Catherine Carter, Interim Economic Development Director. So I'm actually going to ask yet again for a hold on this item. What we've decided was that in an attempt to bring you kind of a larger package of things, and if you can would allow me, I would love to go into a bit of an update on some of the things that will be forthcoming. So then there'll be kind of a nice package rather than have this kind of like one item here, one item there. So if you are amenable to that.
So you want us to take, you're requesting we take no action this evening, so this will be for information purposes only. Do you want to do the full presentation this evening in reference to just educating us?
I would, if you wouldn't mind.
I don't mind, if that's all right with the committee.
Fantastic. So as I mentioned, we've got a lot of different things kind of in the hopper that we're trying to make this kind of very unique project. It's almost kind of a new way of thinking about options for financing large development projects. This is not a particularly large project, but still our hope is to kind of try out some different tools so that then they will be kind of more accessible to the rest of KCK, and that we can really use this in a different way. So I just wanted to give just a couple, I had promised that I would give kind of periodic updates on the grocery store. So first of all, I want to make sure everyone, there should be about 19,000 some folks who will be receiving these postcards this week. This is a community meeting. We had the design for the grocery store. It was submitted, the preliminary plan was submitted just last week. And as part of that process, there is necessary, obviously we would do it anyway, we want the public's input on this project, but we're going to have 4 community meetings. There'll be, make sure I get this right, Wednesday, February 13th. There'll be 2 each day. So on the 13th, there'll be one over the lunch hour from 12 to 1:30, and another from 5:30 to 7. And then again on Thursday, February 21st, again, one at noon and one at 5:30. All will be at Memorial Hall. We'll have free parking. We want to encourage as many people to provide their input. This really is a community grocery store, and want to make sure that everyone is heard. So we'll be specifically talking about kind of the design of the grocery store, but we will have people from the MERC there to answer questions and give a little more update on kind of what the interior design would look like, as well as a bit about products and price points and things of that nature. Additionally, the MERC is holding some listening sessions with different community groups, and so that is much more focused on kind of the interior, what are the products that people want to see, making sure that we're really covering all the bases, and this is going to be a very usable and a grocery store that really accommodates the needs of the public. So I did want to go in briefly, kind of at a higher level, on some of the financing kind of strides that we've made, and it's, I think, pretty exciting. I think so, at least. So Kathleen and myself have really been working hard on the pro forma and looking at different options for financing. So we do have the special asset fund from the sale of the downtown hotel. So if necessary, kind of what we were prepared to do is, basically pay a lump sum and just pay for this grocery store to be built. However, we really want to make sure that we're able to leverage these funds, and if it's possible, to be more flexible so that then there are other funds available for other projects that come down the line. That really is, our goal, as we were talking about in the last item, is to use public funds in the most responsible way, but really in a way that gives us kind of the most bang for our buck. So to that end, we have engaged Sunflower Development to help us on a new market tax credit deal for this project. New market tax credits, in a nutshell, I'll try to explain them, but happy to go into as much or as little detail as you would like, either here or at another time. It is fairly dry how tax credits work, but basically you're getting investors to pay for projects that happen in low-income areas. Basically we are working with a community development entity, Central Bank, and they've been very encouraging about our possibility of using new market tax credits on this project. They have a allocation kind of ready that they've been kind of holding aside. So we have formally submitted an application, and it will go through a pretty quick process with Central Bank. And so we're looking for the tax credits there, which will actually, it's very complicated, but ends up kind of being free money-ish. So it will allow us to use this money in a different way so that we're not, we can kind of save some of the other money that we had set aside and use that for other items. Additionally, LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation here in Kansas City, we've been working with them. They have a pre-development fund that is specific for KCK and Wyandotte County that we would really like to see more projects get involved with. And as I would say, as a way to kind of make them as comfortable as they can be with loaning funds to projects in KCK, we figured, what better way than to kind of work on a project like this, where if we can get a loan at a reasonable rate, then again, as loans or mortgages do, that frees up again money for other things. So we've been working with them. They've got a healthy food financing, some funds through that we've been able to kind of work with the interest rates, and so now they're actually offering us a $1.25 million loan at a 3% interest rate, which is actually lower than if we were to do GO bonds, which is pretty phenomenal. So that, again, just kind of frees up some of the cash that we're kind of holding on so that we can do some other things. So in a nutshell, that is what we've been doing, and we're excited to get some more input from the community over the next month, and then hopefully next month I will not only be setting the public hearing for the TIF, I promise not to hold it again, I can take that to the bank, but there'll be some other items relating to the new market tax credits and things like that will be coming forward.
Is the grant money that Mayor Holland talked about still available?
I am not sure what you're referring to.
There was a $1 million grant contingent upon the building of the store, I believe, from the Healthcare Foundation.
Okay, so so a portion of the Healthcare Foundation $1 million grant was spent during the Healthy Campus projects, very small portion. The remainder of the amount was returned back to the Health Foundation.
So they're not willing to support the construction of the grocery store anymore?
Well, we felt that together they all felt that it was best to kind of, it was cleaner to break it off, but then re-examine it once more conversation took place regarding the YMCA and the healthy portion.
So is there any grant money at all for this grocery store?
At this moment, there is the contribution that Catherine mentions from the Special Asset Fund, and there's
what Special Asset Fund?
Well, we have a Special Asset Fund.
Oh, I'm talking about someone else, not us.
Yeah.
grant money outside of us paying for it? Is there any outside grant money that's helping to build the grocery?
Well, other than the new market tax credits, which are sort of like a grant, but not really.
That's not a grant.
So the answer is no, we don't have any.
We do have a couple applications in, and so we are hopeful that we will get some funding down the road, but nothing is committed at this
So all that money that was supposedly there is not really there? We were, okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you. Ms. Carter, good evening. Preliminary plans, since this body is not taking action tonight to move this forward to set a public hearing, if this group next month sees this again, at what point now are you anticipating there's going to be a public hearing on this? Here it said March 28th, so now we're not looking at March 28th anymore.
So it would be 1 month.
In April sometime. Okay. How will deferring that impact the dates on these cards and these meetings?
So these are totally separate. So we are moving forward with planning commission meetings. That's kind of the design, that is on one path. And then the public hearing that I was originally coming here to speak to you tonight was for the tax increment financing. So we are still moving forward with getting a TIF in this location. So it would be for the project plan that would encompass the grocery store, but that's kind of separate. So there's the kind of the financing, but then there's also the design. So we're moving forward with the dates and everything that we've been working with the community and have been publicizing.
Okay. So when these meetings are held as scheduled, the public will be able to ask questions or hear about what the design of the grocery store, internal and external, the type of products that will be carried, and the price point. Who will be there addressing the public on those issues?
So Rob Richardson and myself are going to be doing the portion of the presentation on the building itself. So the design aspects, and that's really what it is moving through the planning commission process for, is the design, making sure it is in conformance with the master plan and things of that nature. Knowing that, while I'm sure many people are very interested in the outside design, I would say the majority of people are more interested on what's happening inside and what they can plan to purchase and giving their input there. So to that end, we'll have folks from the Merck, from the grocery store that will be the operator, present and able to answer questions and take input.
Okay. Well, I think people are going to be very concerned about what it looks like inside the design aspects as well as the products and the price point. This may work out very well then, because if members of the community who have questions about that attend the scheduled meetings, they may have even more input later in April. So now we're looking presumably at a date in April for the public hearing. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner, thanks for bringing that up. I wanted to make sure that there's a difference between a community meeting and taking formal action necessary to call the public in for us to do the IRB approval that night. So with that, if there's no other questions in reference to the resolution being postponed, then if there's nothing else to come before the committee, any questions? Then we're adjourned. Thank you. This is